Picture this. It's a cold winter evening in 9th century Scandinavia, and the longhouse is alive with the sound of clinking horns, boisterous laughter, and the occasional thud of someone face-planting into their wooden bowl. The Vikings. Those legendary seafaring warriors we know for their raids and exploration had turned drinking into an art form that would make modern party planners weep with envy. While the rest of medieval Europe was sipping watered-down ale from clay cups and calling it a night after sunset, the Norse were hosting elaborate drinking competitions that could last for days, complete with intricate rituals, sacred oaths, and enough mead to float a longship. The heart of Viking drinking culture wasn't just about getting drunk, though they certainly excelled at that too. It was about community honor storytelling and forging bonds that could mean the difference between life and death on their next voyage. When a Viking chieftain announced a feast, word would spread across the fjords faster than news of a profitable raid. Warriors would travel for miles, sometimes weeks, to participate in these legendary gatherings where the ale flowed like waterfalls and the stories grew taller with each passing horn. The preparation for a proper Viking drinking session was an event in itself. The women of the household, led by the lady of the house, would begin brewing weeks in advance. They didn't just make one type of alcoholic beverage. Oh no, that would be far too simple for the Norse. They crafted an entire arsenal of fermented delights. There was the standard ale made from barley, the prized mead fermented from honey that could take months to perfect, and various fruit wines that added variety to the evening's entertainment. The brewing process was considered so important that it was often overseen by the household's most experienced women, and the recipes were closely guarded family secrets passed down through generations. But the real magic happened when the drinking horns came out. These weren't just any drinking vessels, they were works of art, often carved from the horns of aurochs or other impressive beasts, decorated with intricate Norse patterns and sometimes even inlaid with precious metals. The most prestigious horns belonged to the jarl or chieftain and could hold enough liquid to challenge even the most seasoned drinker. The beauty of drinking horns, aside from their impressive appearance, was that they couldn't be set down once filled. This meant that once you started drinking, you had to finish the entire contents, leading to some truly spectacular displays of both determination and poor decision-making. The Vikings had developed an entire etiquette around their drinking sessions that would put modern sommelier courses to shame. There were specific toasts for different occasions. The braggerful was a solemn toast, where warriors would make binding oaths about future deeds, often involving promises to perform heroic acts or avenge fallen comrades. The minnie was a toast to honor the dead, particularly fallen warriors and ancestors, ensuring their memory lived on in the hall of the living. Then there were the more light-hearted toasts, celebrating successful raids, good harvests, or simply the joy of being alive and surrounded by friends who might die horribly in battle tomorrow. The drinking competitions themselves were legendary affairs that combined physical endurance with social strategy. Warriors would challenge each other to drinking contests that weren't just about consuming the most alcohol, but about maintaining composure, wit, and the ability to tell increasingly elaborate stories as the night progressed. The goal wasn't necessarily to drink your opponent under the table, though that certainly happened, but to prove your worth as both a warrior and a companion. A Viking who could hold his drink, tell a good story, and still be standing at dawn was considered excellent company for both feasting and raiding. What made these competitions truly special was the storytelling element. As the evening progressed and the mead took hold, the tales would begin. Warriors would regale the assembled crowd with stories of their exploits, each tale growing more fantastic with every retelling. A simple skirmish with a few bandits would transform into an epic battle against a dozen armed giants. A successful trading voyage would become a harrowing adventure through monster-infested waters, where the hero single-handedly fought off sea serpents while negotiating favorable exchange rates for amber and furs. The Skalds, the professional poets and storytellers of Viking society, were the true stars of these drinking sessions. These men had memorized thousands of lines of poetry and could weave tales that would keep an entire hall spellbound for hours. They understood that their audience was becoming progressively more intoxicated as the night wore on, so they would adjust their storytelling accordingly. Early in the evening, they might recite complex sagas about the gods or historical events complete with intricate wordplay and subtle metaphors. As the crowd became more inebriated, the stories would become more action-packed, more humorous, and significantly more bawdy. The competitive aspect extended beyond just drinking and storytelling. Vikings would engage in drinking games that tested various skills while under the influence. There were contests of strength where participants had to lift heavy objects while maintaining their balance after consuming impressive quantities of ale. Memory games where warriors had to recite increasingly long lists of names, places, or genealogies without making mistakes. Riddle competitions where the answers became more creative and less logical as the participants became more creative and less logical themselves. One particularly popular game involved the telling of increasingly outrageous lies, with points awarded for creativity, audacity, and the ability to maintain a straight face while claiming to have personally wrestled Thor or to have discovered a new continent populated entirely by beautiful women who were inexplicably attracted to slightly drunk Viking warriors. The winner was determined not just by the quality of their lies, but by their ability to convince at least some of the increasingly gullible audience that their tales might actually be true. The social dynamics of these drinking sessions were fascinating and complex. While Viking society was hierarchical, the drinking hall was one of the few places where social boundaries could be temporarily relaxed. A successful warrior of humble birth might find himself sharing drinks and stories with jarls and chieftains, earning respect through his wit and drinking prowess rather than his bloodline. Conversely, a high-born warrior who couldn't hold his drink or who proved to be poor company might find his social standing diminished, at least until the next morning when everyone sobered up and remembered their proper places in society. Women played crucial roles in these festivities, though their participation varied depending on their status and the specific occasion. The lady of the house was responsible for ensuring the smooth operation of the feast, directing the serving of food and drink, and often participating in the more formal toasts and ceremonies. Shield maidens, the female warriors of Norse society, were welcome participants in the drinking competitions and were often among the most formidable opponents. These women had proven themselves in battle and were accorded the same respect as their male counterparts when it came to both fighting and drinking. The serving of drinks followed a careful protocol that reinforced social hierarchies while also creating opportunities for honor and advancement. The most honored guests were served first, using the finest drinking horns and receiving the choicest beverages. But the act of serving was itself an honor typically performed by the daughters or wives of the host, and the quality of service reflected on the entire household. A skilled hostess could use the serving ritual to subtly influence social dynamics, perhaps ensuring that potential allies were seated together or that rivals were given slightly smaller portions of the premium mead. As the night progressed and inhibitions lowered along with the level of liquid in the barrels, the festivities would often take on an almost mystical quality. The Vikings believed that alcohol could thin the veil between the mortal world and the realm of the gods, and many claimed to receive visions or divine inspiration during particularly intense drinking sessions. Whether these visions were genuine spiritual experiences or simply the product of consuming large quantities of fermented beverages was a matter of some debate, though the Vikings themselves seemed perfectly willing to accept both explanations simultaneously. The morning after these epic drinking sessions was an experience unto itself. The longhouse would be littered with the remnants of the previous night's festivities. Empty, drinking horns, scattered food, and warriors in various states of consciousness sprawled across benches and floors. But rather than treating this as an embarrassing aftermath to be quickly cleaned up and forgotten, the Vikings embraced it as part of the experience. The survivors would gather to share stories about the previous night's events, often discovering that their memories of what had transpired were wildly different and increasingly creative. These post-drinking storytelling sessions became legendary in their own right, as warriors would attempt to piece together the events of the previous evening while simultaneously embellishing them for dramatic effect. A simple drinking contest would be remembered as an epic battle of wills that shook the very foundations of the hall. A particularly clever riddle would be elevated to the status of divine wisdom, and anyone who had managed to remain conscious until dawn would be celebrated as a hero worthy of saga. The Vikings understood something that modern partygoers often miss: the real value of a good drinking session wasn't just the temporary escape from reality or the loosening of social inhibitions. It was the creation of shared experiences and memories that would bind the community together long after the last drop of mead had been consumed. Warriors who had shared drinks and stories would trust each other more completely in battle. Traders who had competed in drinking games would be more likely to honor their business agreements. And leaders who had proven themselves capable of both hosting and participating in these festivities would earn the loyalty and respect of their followers. The preparation and execution of these drinking traditions required considerable skill planning and resources, making them a display of wealth and status as much as entertainment. A chieftain who could afford to host regular feasts with high-quality mead and ale was demonstrating his success as a leader and his ability to provide for his followers. The quality and quantity of the beverages served, the craftsmanship of the drinking vessels, and the entertainment provided all reflected on the host's reputation and standing in the community. But perhaps most importantly, these drinking traditions served as a form of cultural preservation and transmission. In a society where literacy was limited and most knowledge was passed down orally, the drinking hall became a classroom where young warriors learned the stories, values, and traditions of their people. The combination of alcohol, storytelling, and social pressure created an environment where cultural knowledge was not just transmitted, but actively reinforced and celebrated. The skalds would use these occasions to teach young people about their history, their gods, and their heroes through epic poems and sagas that were far more memorable when accompanied by mead and delivered in the warm, convivial atmosphere of the drinking hall. The drinking competitions themselves taught important lessons about endurance, composure under pressure, and the importance of maintaining one's honor even when faced with significant challenges to one's judgment and coordination. The seasonal nature of Viking drinking traditions added another layer of complexity and meaning to these gatherings. Winter feasts were the most elaborate and important, serving as a way to maintain morale and community bonds during the long, dark months when raiding and trading were impossible. These Jol celebrations, which would later influence Christmas traditions, could last for weeks and involved the entire community. The hall would be decorated with evergreen branches, and special ceremonial drinks would be prepared using recipes that had been passed down through generations of brewmasters. During these winter festivities, the Vikings would engage in elaborate drinking rituals that were designed to ensure good fortune for the coming year. The wassailing tradition, where participants would drink from a communal bowl while making wishes for prosperity and success, became a cornerstone of these celebrations. The bowl itself was often a masterpiece of craftsmanship, carved from rare wood or fashioned from precious metals, and the act of drinking from it was considered both an honor and a responsibility. Each person who drank was expected to make a toast or tell a story that would contribute to the collective good fortune of the community. The summer drinking sessions had a completely different character, often taking place outdoors around massive bonfires that could be seen for miles across the fjords. These gatherings celebrated successful raids, good harvests, or simply the joy of being alive during the brief but glorious Scandinavian summer. The outdoor setting allowed for larger crowds and more boisterous celebrations, with drinking competitions that might involve entire crews of longships competing against each other in tests of both consumption and skill. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking drinking culture was their sophisticated understanding of different types of intoxication and their social implications. They recognized that different beverages produced different effects on both mood and behavior, and they would strategically choose their drinks based on the desired outcome of the evening. Ale, being relatively mild, was perfect for long storytelling sessions where participants needed to maintain their wits and memory. Mead, with its higher alcohol content and association with the gods, was reserved for more serious occasions involving oaths, religious ceremonies, or important negotiations. The stronger fruit wines were often saved for celebrations of military victories or other momentous occasions where uninhibited revelry was not just acceptable, but expected. The Vikings also developed an impressive array of drinking accessories that went far beyond simple horns and cups. They created elaborate serving sets that included ornate ladles for transferring drinks from barrels to individual vessels, strainers for filtering out impurities, and even primitive cooling systems that involved burying sealed containers in snow or cold earth to achieve the perfect serving temperature. The most wealthy and powerful Vikings owned drinking sets that were works of art in their own right, often featuring intricate metalwork, precious stone inlays, and carvings that told stories of famous battles or mythological events. The competitive drinking games themselves evolved into increasingly complex affairs that tested far more than just alcohol tolerance. There were contests that combined drinking with physical challenges, such as the popular game where participants had to consume a horn of mead and then successfully throw an axe at a target, with points awarded for both speed of consumption and accuracy of aim. Another favorite involved drinking while reciting complex genealogies, or lists of kings, with mistakes resulting in additional drinks and eventual elimination from the competition. The storytelling competitions that accompanied these drinking sessions became so sophisticated that they developed their own rules and scoring systems. Participants were judged not just on the entertainment value of their tales, but on their ability to incorporate traditional elements of Norse mythology, their skill at improvisation when challenged by hecklers, and their capacity to maintain narrative coherence even as their blood alcohol levels reached impressive heights. The best storytellers could weave together multiple narrative threads, incorporate audience suggestions, and deliver satisfying conclusions that left their listeners both entertained and enlightened. The role of music in Viking drinking culture cannot be overstated. While the skalds provided the verbal entertainment, musicians with harps, flutes, and drums created the soundtrack for these epic gatherings. The music would evolve throughout the evening, starting with formal, ceremonial pieces during the initial toasts and gradually becoming more lively and participatory as the night progressed. By the peak of the festivities, the entire hall might be engaged in raucous singing with traditional drinking songs that everyone knew by heart, mixing with improvised verses that celebrated the evening's events and participants. The Vikings developed specific songs for different stages of intoxication, understanding that their audience's ability to follow complex melodies and lyrics would change as the evening progressed. Early in the night, they might perform intricate ballads about heroic deeds or tragic love stories. As the crowd became more inebriated, the songs would become simpler, more repetitive, and significantly more bawdy, often featuring call and response sections that allowed even the most intoxicated participants to join in enthusiastically, if not always melodiously. The drinking vessels themselves became symbols of status and achievement within Viking society. A warrior's drinking horn was often as personal and important as his sword or shield. The finest horns were passed down through generations, accumulating stories and significance with each owner. Some horns were said to possess magical properties, either because of the beast from which they came or because of the ceremonies they had witnessed. The most legendary drinking horns had names and reputations of their own, and being invited to drink from a famous horn was considered a tremendous honor. The craftsmanship that went into creating these drinking vessels was extraordinary. Master craftsmen would spend months working on a single horn, carving intricate patterns that told stories or conveyed blessings. The rims might be reinforced with precious metals, and the tips could be fitted with elaborate stands that allowed the horn to be displayed when not in use. The largest horns, capable of holding several pints of liquid, were reserved for the most important occasions and the most honored guests, while smaller, more manageable horns were used for everyday drinking. The social etiquette surrounding the use of these drinking vessels was complex and strictly observed. There were proper ways to hold a horn-specific gestures to make when toasting and traditional phrases to recite when accepting a drink from a host. Violating these customs could result in social embarrassment or even challenges to combat, depending on the severity of the breach and the status of the individuals involved. Young Vikings spent considerable time learning these protocols, understanding that their ability to navigate drinking etiquette could significantly impact their social standing and future opportunities. The Vikings also developed sophisticated methods for managing the inevitable consequences of their enthusiastic drinking culture. They understood the importance of pacing, often consuming substantial amounts of food throughout their drinking sessions to slow the absorption of alcohol and maintain their ability to participate in the evening's activities. The feasts that accompanied drinking sessions were carefully planned to include foods that would complement the beverages being served and help participants maintain their stamina throughout the long night. The morning after rituals were as important as the drinking itself. The Vikings had developed various remedies for dealing with the after effects of their celebrations, ranging from herbal concoctions that promised to clear the head to physical activities designed to sweat out the previous night's excesses. More importantly, they had created social customs that allowed participants to maintain their dignity and honor even after nights of spectacular overindulgence. The concept of morning courage was well understood in Viking culture. The idea that actions taken while drunk might need to be honored or addressed when sober. Warriors who had made boastful claims or issued challenges while intoxicated were expected to follow through on their words, leading to some interesting situations where hungover Vikings found themselves committed to various heroic deeds or dangerous adventures that had seemed much more reasonable the night before. The influence of these drinking traditions extended far beyond simple entertainment. The bonds formed during these sessions often determined political alliances, trading partnerships, and military coalitions. A successful drinking session could cement relationships that would last for decades, while a poorly managed feast could create enemies and undermine a leader's authority. The ability to host impressive drinking gatherings was considered an essential skill for any Viking leader, and those who failed to meet expectations might find their followers looking elsewhere for leadership. The Vikings understood that alcohol could be a powerful tool for diplomacy and negotiation. Many important agreements were reached during drinking sessions when the relaxed atmosphere and shared experience created opportunities for honest communication and compromise. The tradition of sealing agreements with shared drinks meant that breaking such accords was not just a political betrayal, but a violation of sacred hospitality customs. The religious aspects of Viking drinking culture were deeply intertwined with their beliefs about the gods and the afterlife. Odin himself was associated with mead, and was said to have stolen the mead of poetry from the giants, giving it to gods and worthy humans. The concept of Valhalla, the hall of the slain where fallen warriors would feast and fight for eternity, was essentially the ultimate drinking hall where the mead never ran out and the stories never ended. This connection between drinking and the divine gave these gatherings a spiritual dimension that elevated them beyond mere entertainment. Participants believed that by engaging in these traditional drinking rituals, they were connecting with their ancestors and their gods, participating in customs that stretched back to the beginning of time. The toasts to fallen warriors and ancestors weren't just polite gestures, but genuine attempts to maintain communication with the dead and ensure their continued protection and guidance. The seasonal cycles of Viking drinking reflected their deep connection to the natural world and their understanding of the importance of timing in both agriculture and warfare. The spring drinking sessions celebrated the end of winter and the beginning of the raiding season with toasts to successful voyages and profitable adventures. Summer gatherings marked the height of the trading season and celebrated the abundance of the brief northern growing season. Autumn feasts gave thanks for successful harvests and prepared the community for the long winter ahead. Each season brought its own special beverages and customs. Spring might feature the first fresh ales made from the previous year's grain stores, while summer celebrations could include experimental brews made from whatever fruits and herbs were currently available. Autumn feasts featured the finest mead aged to perfection and ready for the important winter ceremonies. Winter drinking relied on carefully preserved beverages that had to last through the long months when brewing was difficult or impossible. The Vikings' understanding of fermentation and brewing was remarkably sophisticated for their time. They had developed techniques for controlling fermentation temperatures, managing yeast cultures, and aging beverages to achieve specific flavors and alcohol contents. The best brewmasters were highly valued members of society, and their skills were considered as important as those of skilled warriors or craftsmen. The brewing knowledge was often closely guarded within families and passed down through generations of women who served as the primary brewmasters in Viking society. These women held positions of considerable respect and influence, as their skills could make or break a household's reputation for hospitality. The most accomplished brewmasters could create beverages so exceptional that they became legendary throughout the region, with warriors traveling great distances just to sample their creations and perhaps convince the brewmaster to share her secrets. The complexity of Viking brewing extended to their understanding of different ingredients and their effects. They knew which herbs could enhance the intoxicating properties of their beverages, which fruits would add desirable flavors without compromising fermentation, and which grains would produce the smoothest ales. Some brewmasters specialized in creating beverages with specific properties, drinks that would enhance courage before battle, promote healing after injury, or induce the prophetic dreams that were so valued in Norse culture. The trading aspects of Viking drinking culture created networks that spanned continents. Premium ingredients for brewing were among the most valuable trade goods, with honey from distant lands commanding prices comparable to precious metals. Exotic spices and herbs that could enhance the flavor and potency of mead were worth their weight in silver, and successful traders often built their reputations on their ability to acquire rare brewing ingredients that would set their beverages apart from the competition. The Vikings developed elaborate systems for preserving and transporting their beverages during long voyages. They created specialized containers that could withstand the rigors of sea travel while maintaining the quality of their contents. The ability to bring quality drinks on raids and trading expeditions was not just a luxury, but a strategic advantage, as it allowed Viking leaders to maintain morale among their crews and impress potential allies or trading partners in foreign lands. The diplomatic implications of Viking drinking culture extended far beyond their own territories. When Vikings encountered other cultures during their travels, their drinking customs often served as a form of cultural exchange and negotiation. The ability to participate respectfully in local drinking customs, while also sharing their own traditions, could mean the difference between successful trade relationships and violent conflicts. Many Viking leaders became skilled cultural diplomats, learning to navigate the drinking customs of the various peoples they encountered, while maintaining their own cultural identity. The influence of Viking drinking traditions on other cultures was profound and lasting. As Vikings settled in new territories, they brought their drinking customs with them, often blending them with local traditions to create new hybrid cultures. The Norman conquest of England, the Viking settlements in Ireland and Scotland, and the establishment of trading posts throughout Eastern Europe all involved the transmission and adaptation of Norse drinking customs that would influence local cultures for generations. The storytelling traditions that accompanied Viking drinking sessions became the foundation for much of what we know about Norse culture and mythology today. The sagas and Eddas that preserve Viking history and beliefs were originally oral traditions that were refined and perfected in drinking halls across Scandinavia. The combination of alcohol, competitive storytelling, and audience participation created an environment where these stories were constantly being tested, refined, and improved, ensuring that only the most compelling and memorable tales survived. The competitive nature of Viking storytelling during drinking sessions led to the development of increasingly sophisticated narrative techniques. Storytellers learned to read their audiences, adjusting their tales based on the crowd's level of intoxication and interest. They developed techniques for building suspense, creating memorable characters, and delivering satisfying conclusions that would leave their listeners eager for more. The best storytellers could improvise entire narratives on the spot, weaving together traditional elements with contemporary events and personal experiences to create unique stories that captured the imagination of their audiences. The role of women in Viking drinking culture was more complex and significant than many historical accounts suggest. While the serving and brewing responsibilities were important, women also participated as competitors, judges, and honored guests in their own right. Shield maidens and other female warriors were expected to hold their own in drinking competitions, and their participation was seen as a mark of their equality with their male counterparts. The wives and daughters of prominent Vikings often served as arbiters of drinking contests, their judgments carrying considerable weight in determining winners and settling disputes. The educational aspects of Viking drinking traditions extended beyond simple entertainment and cultural transmission. These gatherings served as informal schools where young people learned essential life skills. They observed how successful leaders managed large groups of people, how disputes were resolved through negotiation and compromise, and how alliances were formed and maintained. The drinking hall was often the first place where young Vikings learned to navigate complex social situations, read the motivations and intentions of others, and developed the interpersonal skills that would serve them throughout their lives. The Vikings understood that alcohol could reveal character in ways that formal interactions could not. A person's behavior while drinking was considered a reliable indicator of their true nature, and many important decisions about partnerships, alliances, and leadership positions were made based on observations of how individuals conducted themselves during drinking sessions. This led to a culture where maintaining one's honor and composure while drinking was considered as important as prowess in battle or skill in craftsmanship. The economic impact of Viking drinking culture was substantial and far-reaching. The demand for quality beverages and drinking accessories created entire industries and trade networks. Skilled craftsmen specialized in creating drinking horns, cups, and serving implements. Farmers focused on growing the grains and fruits needed for brewing. Traders developed routes specifically designed to transport brewing ingredients and finished beverages. The wealth generated by these industries helped fund the Viking expansion and exploration that would ultimately change the course of European history. The technological innovations that emerged from Viking brewing and drinking culture had applications far beyond entertainment. The techniques they developed for fermentation, preservation, and quality control influenced food production and storage methods throughout their territories. Their understanding of the medicinal properties of various herbs and fermented beverages contributed to advances in healthcare and nutrition. The containers and vessels they created for storing and serving drinks influenced pottery, metalworking, and woodworking techniques across Northern Europe. The psychological and social functions of Viking drinking culture were remarkably sophisticated. These gatherings served as pressure valves for a society that faced constant dangers and uncertainties. The opportunity to temporarily escape from the harsh realities of medieval life, to bond with companions, and to participate in activities that reinforced community values was essential for maintaining social cohesion and individual mental health. The Vikings understood that a community that could celebrate together could also fight together, and their drinking traditions were designed to strengthen the bonds that held their society together. The legacy of Viking drinking traditions can be seen in modern Scandinavian culture, where concepts like hygge and lagom reflect the same values of community moderation and shared experience that characterized Norse drinking customs. The emphasis on quality over quantity, the importance of creating welcoming environments for social interaction, and the understanding that alcohol should enhance rather than dominate social experiences all trace their roots back to Viking drinking halls. The influence of these traditions extended far beyond Scandinavia, shaping drinking customs throughout the regions where Vikings traveled, traded, and settled. The pub culture of Britain, the beer halls of Germany, and the tavern traditions of Eastern Europe all show traces of Viking influence. The concept of the communal drinking space as a center for social interaction, news sharing, and community bonding can be traced directly back to the Norse drinking hall. The Vikings' understanding of the relationship between alcohol and creativity had a profound impact on the development of literature and poetry throughout Northern Europe. The tradition of combining drinking with storytelling created an environment where verbal artistry flourished, leading to the development of sophisticated poetic forms and narrative techniques that would influence European literature for centuries. The concept of the inspired poet or storyteller, touched by divine madness and capable of revealing profound truths, has its roots in the mead halls of Viking Scandinavia. The religious and spiritual dimensions of Viking drinking culture provided a model for how alcohol could be integrated into religious practice in ways that enhanced, rather than undermined, spiritual experience. The careful balance between celebration and reverence, the use of alcohol to facilitate communication with the divine, and the understanding that intoxication could be a pathway to spiritual insight all influence the development of religious practices throughout the regions where Viking culture took root. The democratic elements of Viking drinking culture, where social hierarchies could be temporarily suspended and individuals could earn respect through wit, skill and character rather than birth or wealth, provided early examples of more egalitarian social structures. The drinking hall was often one of the few places in medieval society where merit could triumph over status, and this tradition influenced the development of more democratic institutions throughout Northern Europe. As the Viking Age drew to a close and Scandinavian societies became increasingly Christianized and centralized, many of these drinking traditions evolved and adapted rather than disappearing entirely. The great halls of medieval kings and nobles retained many elements of Viking drinking culture, including the emphasis on hospitality, the importance of shared meals and drinks in cementing political alliances, and the tradition of combining entertainment with important social and political functions. The Vikings had created something truly remarkable, a drinking culture that served multiple functions simultaneously, providing entertainment, education, social bonding, religious expression and political organization, all within the context of shared celebration. Their understanding that alcohol could be a tool for building rather than destroying communities, for revealing rather than obscuring truth, and for creating rather than preventing meaningful human connections was sophisticated beyond their time and remains relevant today. In the end, the Viking drinking traditions represented far more than simple revelry or escapism. They were a comprehensive social technology carefully developed over generations to address the fundamental human needs for community meaning and celebration in the face of an uncertain and often dangerous world. The fact that these traditions were so successful, so enduring, and so influential suggests that the Vikings understood something profound about human nature and social organization that modern societies might do well to remember. The great drinking halls of the Vikings may have fallen silent centuries ago, but their echoes can still be heard in every toast raised among friends, every story told over drinks, and every moment when alcohol serves to bring people together rather than drive them apart. In their own boisterous, mead-soaked way, the Vikings had discovered one of the great secrets of human happiness: that the best drinking traditions are not about the drinking at all, but about the traditions, the connections, and the communities that drinking can help create and sustain.